I want to welcome everyone to the first Engineering and Operations Management Lunch and Learn webinar series of the academic year for 2021. Um, my name is Karin Hickenbotham, and I'll be moderating along with our presenter, Greg Hutto. Just want to brief mention that we are housed in the College of Engineering and Industrial Engineering Department. We offer three Master of Science programs in Operations Management, Engineering Management, and Engineering. We also offer three graduate certificates in Project Management, Lean Six Sigma, and Homeland Security. So I am the marketing and communications specialist for the Master of Science in Operations Management and Engineering Management. We ask that you save all questions until the end of the presentation. We can utilize the chat box at the end of the presentation. We also want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on ScholarWorks at UARC in our Operations Management collection. So welcome everyone, thank you, and we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll introduce you to our presenter for today. So today we're going to be presenting on critical path, or why wedding planners get ulcers. And so I'm very excited to introduce to you one of our MSOM instructors, Greg Hutto. And Greg is a Test Wing Chief Operations Analyst. Mr. Hutto is the 96th Test Wing Chief Operations Analyst, embedding design and experiments as the principal test method for several hundred tests each year. He teaches several short courses in test methods at all levels. U.S. Air Force Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Hutto was Senior Military Advisor to the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center and a Master Instructor at the Test Pilot School, Edwards Air Force Base, California. Mr. Hutto is a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy in Operations Research and holds a master's in that field from Stanford University. In Greg's 40 plus years, he's been the chief ops analyst in nearly every major Air Force test organization. He would like to publicly repent 11 years in tests without the benefits of design of experiments. So, Mr. Hutto, I will hand the reins over to you and look forward to the presentation. Thank you.
That's great. I'm happy to be here today. Let me just start my video for just a moment. You can see I am wearing my Arkansas shirt. So in my side gig here as an Arkansas instructor, which I've been doing since about 2007, absolutely love teaching in this university and the superb system they have for graduate education, especially online. It's just outstanding, really world class, and a super support structure. Happy to be here. Let me go back to sharing my screen. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the projects that we have a lot of fun teaching with in our project management curriculum here. And get going with that. All right, so there actually is a science to project management. You may or may not know that. We have a couple of courses in it. We have the project management course, and then recently, in the last couple of years, we've added the advanced project management course. And when you put those together with a couple of other classes, as Karin will tell us about later, you can build yourself a project management certificate. And so in our project management teaching, we introduce folks to the professional society, 600,000 members worldwide of the Project Management Institute, and they have this thing called a PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. And in that reference guide there, they define projects as a temporary endeavor to create a unique good or service. And projects also have the distinction of having being quite different from day-to-day work because they're a unique effort. And projects always have a budget. They have a limited amount of resources. They have a schedule. They have a due date where the things must be done by. And then they've got some kind of output, a deliverable, a service, a document, a piece of software, whatever it might be. But it ain't easy. and it ain't always a win. And that's what we're going to talk about today with our wedding project. And so I quoted a couple of what I find humorous, kind of cynical laws of project management. These are available widely on the internet. There's law number 8 and law number 9 for your consumption. Okay, so the two most common methods of conducting project management are the critical path method, and it's really showing its age here. It's been around and is widely used over 70 or almost 70 years now. It was invented in the 1950s and widely used on the Polaris nuclear submarine, also on the NASA effort in the 1960s that got us onto the moon. Very common for companies to spend a lot of money on project management software such as Microsoft Project. I'll show you a little bit of that later, and certainly on project manager training and certification. There's a little bit of an upstart method, however, that has had some success recently. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and show you some of the things that it adds to the critical path method. This is Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, who invented this idea of theory of constraints for manufacturing in the 1980s, and then extended this theory of constraints into what he calls critical chain as opposed to critical path in the late 90s. He introduced this for project management, which, as I mentioned, is distinct from day to day work. So let's talk a little bit about the critical path method. So, in real top line view there, to do a critical path project, you have to define a set of tasks and their dependencies, if any. And for each of those tasks, we have to estimate the resources, the time, the cost, the machinery, and so on and so forth it'll take to accomplish those tasks. We then link them together over time to build our schedule. So we have a network of these tasks with their dependencies, and then we identify the longest path through this network, and we want to manage this critical path. In the little cartoon up there, you see the critical path is that center line of tasks that are linked together, and that defines the earliest time that we can finish the project. So moving along. Uh, Really important note for this whole talk today is these task time estimates are not by any means a deterministic value. They, in fact, are. They're estimates, right? So they have uncertainty with them. So if for Karin, when she asked me, "Hey, Greg, I need an abstract for this talk," she said, "How long do you need to do that?" I had two numbers. I had a number in my mind, and then there's a number I told her. I said, "I can get that to you next Wednesday," but I was actually thinking it'll take me about an hour to put together a somewhat entertaining abstract to this talk. So I gave her actually estimate C out here, and actually I was thinking it would be more like estimate A, and it probably took me something along this line. So remember that each of these estimates has quite a surprising amount of slack or safety in them, and we need to remember that life is uncertain, and that's why we put this slack or safety in our task estimates. And so our project management methodology needs to account for and provide this slacker safety. And I think critical chain does that in a very interesting way that I'll bring about at the end of this story. Okay, so no academic talk would be complete without reference to the technical literature. And since today I'm going to be talking about wedding planning, I reached deep into the technical literature. One of the most respected journals in the wedding planning literature is Southern Bride, and that gentleman will make the blood rise of any red-blooded SEC fan, right? We know him. He's a Clemson quarterback. Finally got rid of him, and he's over here in Jacksonville now, I think, or Tampa, one of the two teams. Anyway, but he's out of the way. And if you look over there on the right, you see some of the things that a wedding planner has to do. So without further ado, let's get into our wedding project. This is drawn from our textbook, Larson's textbook on project management, and it's one of our favorite examples because everybody can get along and resonate with planning a wedding. So the problem is called the now wedding planning. It's in chapter 8 of Larson's book. And so imagine a New Year's Eve conversation this year in 2021. And the daughter Lauren comes and springs it on her family that she's engaged and we're going to get married. And mom and dad say, "That's wonderful. So when is the wedding?" And Lauren springs up with 3 weeks. Connor is in the Air National Guard. He's deploying 30 January, and we've paid for planning a 7-day honeymoon to Aruba, and the money's not refundable, by the way. And mom and dad, I've learned this now with my two grown children. One of the best things you can say when they spring things like this is, "Oh, wow, you don't say." So, graph theory to the rescue. Can we actually marry off Lauren before our hero Connor deploys? That's the problem. Okay, so let's learn a little bit about building a project here using what's called a Gantt chart. So the first thing we need to do is have a series of tasks. So we want to do the now wedding. Here are our tasks in the first column. This is the duration of each of the tasks. The project management software project will give us a start and finish when we lay this out in the calendar. And then we have to identify any predecessor tasks that have to be completed before we can do this task. So I have to start. I reserve the church hall. That has a predecessor of start. I have to choose a dress pattern. That has a predecessor of start. And I go on down here to ordering the material for the dress, which is going to be really critical. It has a predecessor of task number 3. I can't order the material till I pick out the dress pattern. All right, moving along. The next one, now I put these with a bar graph here, a sideways bar graph that's whose length is proportional to the duration of the task. So there's my 1-day start. It'll take me 14 days by the church rules to reserve the church hall. I have a dress pattern that's going to take me 3 days to do. My maid of honor is going to take 10 days to do all the maid of honor work. And then you can see there's a link here, a dependency from the dress pattern to the ordering of the material. And this red set of blocks will be our critical path. All right, so moving along, let me go ahead and show you what Microsoft Project looks like. So here's Microsoft Project Professional. This, by the way, you'll get a free copy of this if you sign up for our project management classes. And this is at least worth $600. It's a fully functional, not time limited resource that any project manager would find helpful. So here's the now wedding laid out in its full glory inside the project management Microsoft project. So I'm not going to work with that. I'm going to work with my slides today just to make sure that we don't have hiccups here. So going back to my slides. Oops, wrong one. I want to go with the slideshow. There we go. All right. So here's the way this the essence of this looks like for the now wedding. If you lay out all the estimated durations and their dependencies, there's when Lauren wanted to get married in 3 weeks on the 21st of January, and here on the 30th, right in that time frame there, that is when Connor is deploying. So you can see right now the wedding is only going to occur here on the looks like the 26th of the month, and then their honeymoon would go well over the period of time that Connor needs to head out of town for his deployment. So 21 January is not feasible, and why not? The critical path includes all the the dress activities, and therefore the critical path is not going to support a 21 January wedding. So what can we do? Well, certainly we can buy back some of this time. So I'm going to move over to using Excel to represent this, and this is just as easy to see here, but it gives me a little bit more flexibility of annotating the chart. These orange blocks here form the critical path, and so Lauren prevails upon her father to pay for some more of this wedding. So he buys back some expedited ordering of the material that cuts that down to 5 days duration. He pays the seamstress a bit more money to cut the time for the dress down to 9 days. And now, when we stack this new critical path on here, we see that in fact Lauren can get married right here on day 21. They've got their 7 day honeymoon, and Connor can deploy. So this is a tight schedule. Everything, there's not a lot of slack in here, but it's feasible if all goes well. Now, let me explain why wedding planners get ulcers. Here's what actually occurs. So the first thing that happens is mom catches the flu, and she's down for 3 days, can't work on the guest list. So the guest list doesn't start until the 4th of January. Um, the Bob's printing shop here loses a motor for one of their printers. He's down for a couple of days, and so it shifts the start of the printing out to the 4th. But the key thing, and you can see those really aren't on the critical path, so those delays don't really affect the end date for the project. But what really eats our lunch here is that the ordering of the wedding material is lost in transit when they ship it, and we don't find that out until the 10th of January, only 11 days before the wedding. There's nothing to sew, and so we have to reorder the material when it gets in. We now have 9 days to sew the dress. We can do the dress fitting and the dress pressing, and the earliest we can get married here is around the 28th or the 29th of the month. And unfortunately, that leaves no time for their honeymoon, and Connor will deploy a very grumpy groom. So this is the reason that wedding planners get ulcers, is that life's uncertain, and when these kind of uncertainties plague our projects, we end up with delay. We bust our schedule, and in this case, we not only busted our schedule, but we also increased our cost, and we didn't end up with all the desired features, such as a 7 day honeymoon in Aruba. So, what's up with this? What are some of the problems that ail critical path method? Let me talk about a few of those, and how maybe critical chain can assist us in not falling prey to some of these real life problems. All right, so it's any place you look on the internet, you can find lists of references of just epic project failures, and here are some of the ones that I've used over the years. There's an outfit called the Standish Group. They put out what's called the Chaos Report every year. It's primarily information technology projects, but the earlier versions of the Chaos Report are typically available in various places on the internet for free. If you want the current one, you're going to have to pay their membership rate. But you can see what happens here. Being a defense um, worker, I've worked for the Air Force in all kinds of roles, as active duty in the reserves, as a contractor, and the last 19 years now as a civil servant. So, having done all of these things, I can certainly attest that many of our Air Force acquisition projects are late. So, again, why is that happening? What can we do about it? So one of the things that happens is we have this thing called the student syndrome. So when Karin again asked me to do that abstract for this talk, I told her that it would take me a week. You can absolutely guarantee that I didn't get started on it that night. I might have thought a little bit about it, but fact of the matter is, I didn't actually start until the previous day. I don't think I started working on the abstract till Tuesday, the day before it was due. So, since I knew that I had that week's worth of slack in there, I wasted that time and I procrastinated. And what this leads to in project management is chronically late starts. We have all that slack built in, there's no hurry. I've got plenty of time to complete it. And yet, if we start chronically late, then when the uncertain events like our wedding occur, then we're in trouble. The second problem with critical path, the way it's typically taught and practiced, is there's absolutely no incentive to turn the work in early. There's nothing in the project of giving this talk that's an incentive for me to provide Karin an abstract before the deadline on Wednesday. So she's expecting it on Wednesday, and I'm planning on giving it to her on Wednesday. And so, even if I finished it on Tuesday, I'm not going to turn it in early because I can still polish it a little bit, add one more joke or another reference in there or something like that. So what this leads to is in our projects, we don't have early finishes. And then finally, almost everybody has other things going on in their life. And so we are prone to in work and in our lives to this problem of multitasking. We switch among the various projects in our life, working one and the other and one and then the other, and we don't actually finish any of the things that we're working on time, but everything is delayed as we switch back and forth among the tasks. And here's the bottom line result from these three problems. Our safety, remember the safety we put in there? All of that extra slack time we put into our time estimates is wasted. And when we do multitasking as well, that increases the delays. And so and when you look at how the project is actually run on the ground, our delays add up or compound, and they're not offset by early completions because there's no incentive to turn the work in early. So, what do we do about all of that? Okay, so the first big idea in critical chain is we have to have that slack. We have to have that safety because life's uncertain. And so when we look at the top here, we have the before project. There's our critical path, right? And here are some feeding chains that feed into the critical path to get us to our finish line. So the first thing that you do in critical chain is you take all that slack out of the individual task estimates. You don't waste it, but instead you put it in a null task here called a buffer. And so I'm going to get these three tasks finished by this time. And if there's any delays, they'll eat into this thing called a feeding buffer. And then the total delays in the project can eat into what's called the project buffer. And this can be as big as a quarter or a third of the length of the entire project. So we haven't lost that safety. It's still there, but a couple of things happen. First of all, the task times are much shorter. And now I know that I don't have that slack that I was relying on when I procrastinated on the abstract. So I need to start now. And there's also an incentive to turn it in early. So the second thing that's typically done in critical chain is that instead of allowing all the projects to start, think back to Lauren's wedding. Mom's got things to do during January, so does dad, and so on and so forth. So these other projects that are going on in their life also take time away from their wedding. So in a work setting, what we typically do is we say we are not going to allow all these projects to start until we can get them done. So here's the shared resource in all of those projects, and we start this project. That resource works on this task. Then we don't start this one until it's delayed a little bit. So this resource now can go from this task to this task to this task. And notice what happens. all the projects are shorter, all of them are finished on time, as opposed to up here when we have folks doing multitasking. So this replaces critical chain replaces deadlines with turn the work in as soon as possible, because that allows me to increase my flow of projects through the entire business. So another big idea of critical chain that's not typically found in critical path. All right, then the final thing is there's some really good ideas in critical path. This idea of earned value management, and if you take our classes, you'll learn about that. Very, very useful way to track project schedules. But another metric that's helpful in a critical chain is this idea of looking at the percent of the work done, the percent of the chain complete, and it starts with 0, goes out to 100% here, plotted against the percent of those buffers consumed. So the point I want to point out is here, if I finish with 100% of the buffer consumed and 100% of the work done, it's on time. And this thing, due to quantum mechanics, drifted. That diamond should be up there at the 100 point on this graph. And the way you use this graph to manage is ones that are burning through their buffer but not making progress on completing the work. Those are the ones that get management attention. And that is a very big help to senior executives as they look at their workforce every day and say, how do I focus? How do I uh, um, how do I provide attention in a way that's going to help the organization optimally in some sense? Okay, moving along. All right, so how would we do critical chain for the now wedding? Well, what I would do is the dress still becomes the critical part, but I've shortened all of these times with the exception of this one. This is by regulation here. The church rules say I can't reserve it till 14 days out. So I look at the 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 dress pattern. I've cut the times, and I tell the folks there is no more slack built into your task estimates. You have to get on and get the work done as rapidly as possible. What that leaves me then is about a 5 or 6 day project buffer, which is about a third of the total project length. All right. These little buffers here are called feeding buffers, which I can eat into because they feed into the critical path or the critical chain here. And I want to have these feeding buffers so that the feeding paths don't delay the critical chain. All right, so this is the way it looks when I start it. This gives me time to get the wedding on the 21st, 7 day honeymoon, and then Connor is off on the 30th of January for his deployment. Now, when those uncertain events happen, here's what happens. I'm going to skip the guest list and the printing because those don't really affect the project completion. But if we focus on our lost in transit for the material and have to reorder that, and I have to wait to sew on the dress, we can see that I ate through all of my buffer here, but I still can complete the wedding on time, get my honeymoon done, and get Connor out the door because I explicitly allowed for uncertainty and those unknown unknowns that jump up and bite us in managing our project. So we consumed all our buffer, but we were still on time. And that's one of the key differences between critical path and critical chain. Okay, so let me tell you a story, and then I'll be done with my talk for today, and and we can take some questions if you like. So this is a story that really stuck with me. I first ran into theory of constraints back in the aughts. I think it was about 2004. Our a new wing commander came in, and he looked at how we did business in the test wing that I was the chief analyst of, and he says, "How do you manage your projects? What kind of project management method do you use?" And I was embarrassed to say that we don't really use one. We kind of go, well, I'll need to start the test plan about there. I'll need to start my test about there. I'll need to finish it about there, and then give me 90 days to get the report out. And so I'd put these milestones on a calendar, and then if I didn't start the test plan on time, I just moved the milestones. And so we were never late because we just moved our milestones around. So not very professional project management. And he said, "What is this theory of constraints? And what does that have to do with project management?" And I looked at him and I said, "Colonel, I understand all three of those English words, but I've never heard them strung together like that. But being a Naval Academy graduate, the proper response is, I'll find out, sir." So I went and did some research on theory of constraints. And in my travels and in my researches, I came to the Raytheon Tucson Center of Excellence for Project Management in 2004. And one of the senior project managers there told me this little story. He said Raytheon was contracting with a company up in Colorado Springs who was using theory of constraints for their project management, for providing some sort of a missile subsystem. Let's say it's the navigational subsystem, the inertial measuring unit, and the GPS receiver. Those two put together make a what we call an integrated GPS INS, or an IGI. So let's suppose this little firm up in Colorado Springs is building this IGI for us, and they apply theory of constraints project management on this. Well, what is that going to do? Well, if we think back to the slides there, we have our critical chain. And what's the rule? The rule is start on your task as soon as you can, as soon as the handoff is made to you to start on your task, and as quickly as you can, turn it in. So if I actually turn it in early, I actually can buy back some of that buffer that some of my compatriots have eaten from me. So I get started soon and I turn it in early. And the way they implemented that in this little company is they bought this big golden chain. You can see this caricature in this cartoon here. And what they literally did was they would put the golden chain around the head of the worker or workers who were working on tasks that were part of the critical chain. And when you saw somebody with a gold chain like that, basically everybody in the company worked for them. So they got a parking spot right outside the door. They had lunches that were catered and brought to them every day. They would ask other employees, all the way up to the president and the vice president, to run their errands. So they went and got their cleaning. Back when we used to wear uniforms to work, and dress clothes to work, picked their kids up from school, did a little grocery shopping. All those errands were done by their other workers, so they could focus on the critical tasks. And in doing that, they had 100% on-time delivery record, which is unprecedented in the United States military for projects. I told this to one of my classes here last winter, and one of the young men was so taken by this story of the golden chain that he was managing a team that were building a missile for this large defense contractor, and they had a typical missile build that took about 62 hours. Typically, was their critical path. So they went and took that missile build, laid out all the tasks, all the scheduled times, and so on and so forth, and did it by critical path, and that cut off a few hours, about 10% of the time, and everyone was very pleased. But then he thought, maybe I could apply that golden chain idea. So he didn't have a golden chain, but he did have a lime green anti-static wrist strap. And so they would give the lime green anti-static wrist strap to whoever was working on the path that was on the critical chain. And when they did that and supported that individual by running their errands and bringing their food and all that sort of thing, they cut the time from about 61 hours to 41 hours, which was a full one third of the project duration. And that got the vice president's attention at the work site this young engineer was working on, and he got a promotion, and he got booted upstairs to manage a larger project. So there's a real life example that warms all of our instructor hearts when we did some good to some of our students and we see them implement in their work the kinds of ideas that we teach them in our graduate school. So one of my favorite stories, and really highlight professionally of this year for me. Okay, so here's some bibliographies, some references. There's two great companies I know that still do this: outfit called ProChain and an outfit called Realization. Both of them are commercial theory of constraints companies. They make their business by teaching folks how to implement this idea of theory of constraints or critical chain, and there's a number of other references there that you might find interesting. And of course, there's a Southern Bride reference, so don't forget that. All right, so we've got time for some question and answers. I am right on time. I was expecting to finish at 36. It's by my clock 35 minutes and 11 seconds. So we got plenty of time for a few questions if people have those. And I'm going to turn the floor back over to Karin and let her run the question and answer period.
Sure. Thank you, Greg, so much. That was very interesting. I love it. Like Greg said, we're going to have time for some questions. For Greg, if you could type those in the chat box, we'll monitor that. But while you're formulating those questions or kind of thinking about, reflecting on the presentation, we can tell you a little bit about our programs, our Master of Science in Operations Management. We are a 100% online program. We have in-state tuition for everyone. It comprises of 30 hours with our 10 graduate courses. There are up to 4 prereqs that may be required depending on your situation. We have 5 8-week sessions per year, and you can pair, like Greg mentioned before, one of our graduate certificates with the Master of Science in Operations Management or the Master of Science in Engineering Management, or the graduate certificates also stand by themselves. There's no GRE or GMAT required right now during COVID times because of testing center operations. We are accepting anyone with above a 2.5, but anyone with a 3.0 is waived automatically. Our total program cost is anywhere between 12 and 15,000, depending on the prereqs I just mentioned that are needed. We can tell you a little bit more about the certificates here next. So we mentioned the project management certificate, of course. It's designed to prepare students for the professional certification. We also offer Lean Six Sigma, where you can learn how to eliminate problems, remove waste, and reduce variation to improve operations. And then our Homeland Security certificate is designed for industry and safety professionals to learn how to mitigate risk. Next. A little bit about our graduate certificates, a little less of a commitment. There's only 4 classes, a total of 12 hours to complete those. And again, I just mentioned you can obtain these certificates as either part of your master's degree or stand alone, and those classes will double count in both programs. Again, the 2.5 undergraduate GPA is for the graduate certificates as well, with no GRE or GMAT required. And it's also a great way to transition into your master's if you decide to move on and make that full commitment. Next. And again, this is a special COVID-19 announcement effective through spring 2022. If you are interested in applying to the program, we are waiving the GRE for those applicants who have a 2.5 or a 2.99. Once those testing centers do go back into full operations, then the admission requirements will then go back to anywhere above a 3.0. Next. Okay, so anyone who's on right now, if you have any questions for Greg, any of our wonderful staff that decided to join us today, and our director and associate and assistant directors, notice that we had another project management instructor on today, Mr. Nethercutt. So If anybody has any questions for Greg, we certainly have time to explore those. There we go. Get my chat up here, and so um, Mindy Hunter. Thank you, Mindy. She's one of our assistant director. She's in charge of our faculty and does a great job working with them. And Greg, she asked, what is the difference in the PMP license and the project management certificate? Can you do both?
That's a great question. So, and I'll defer to Leonard if he's got some thoughts on this as well. The project management professional PMP certification is something that's handed out by the Project Management Institute that I started out with. So you can take a test there, and if you pass that test, and you have a few other requirements, years of experience, and a few other things like that, you can get the project management professional certification from PMI. The project management certificate is, of course, handed out by the University of Arkansas Graduate School. It's a graduate certificate, and certainly you can do both. And in fact, Leonard and my instructor colleagues have built a really nice advanced project management course. I haven't had a chance to play with much, but one of the advantages of doing that is that as part of that course, you join the Project Management Institute as a student member, and you get to know in some detail what the requirements are to get the project management professional certification and other certifications um, that are offered by the Project Management Institute. Um, Leonard, have you got any other thoughts you'd like to share on that?
Uh, I sure don't, Greg. I thought you had provided a great answer and a comparison between the PMP certification and the MSOM project management certificate. Thank you.
Yeah, but our instructors who put these classes together that I've got four of those. They've been quiet today, so that's fortunate. Anyway, our instructors who put these two courses together and their certificate together are well versed in the PMBOK, the Project Management Book of Knowledge. And if you take those courses and do well in them, you are very, very well prepared for taking the project management professional certificate. Maybe just a little bit more study on your part and brushing up on some of the practice tests. But we've had a good success rate of folks getting that certification out of PMI. And if you're going to do project management, I understand that's worth quite a bit of money professionally to have that set of letters after your name.
Okay, so are you reading Russell's?
I'm reading the question there. The U.S. federal government seems to have not done as well as would have been expected in project managing the COVID-19 pandemic. How likely is that this program will make us competent in project management in emergencies? Well, you got a point there, but I'll tell you one project that you just definitely got to take your hat off to is Project Warp Speed, for those companies that participated in that government project to develop a vaccine, and those companies that didn't participate in that. I think if you want to look at the project success, the development of those vaccines in 9 months' time, and the success that they've had worldwide, I think is just really an outstanding improvement in project management. So the managing the COVID epidemic is a little harder because you got to get to the hearts and minds of people to actually get them to do what's good for them, like wearing masks and washing hands and getting the vaccine. And that's a huge challenge. Um, So yeah, the project management, as long as we have control over some of the tasks and the workers that are doing the tasks, yeah, these ideas in project management certainly can help us in emergencies. But when it's hearts and minds of people, uh, that's uh, that's another graduate certificate that I'm not well versed in. So, Leonard, you want to add anything to that? Or Rich, you've been we've got the Homeland Security and change management. Anything you want to add to that question?
I was gonna say, Rich just did a webinar on resilience and crisis management a year ago. So, and fast forward, we're back here again.
We are. It wasn't very well. This is Rich. So I'll say to kind of add, it's a great question about the federal government's ability to implement not just looking specifically at constraints, but also how they apply agile concepts when they're applying mitigation. It's always um, hindsight type of operation. So we could do we're going to do an entire webinar just on, and we do in the crisis management course, actually go through a critique of missteps that would have made things better. We'd start with communication, but there's several things that we could talk to. In projects, communications is urgently important. So a lot more we could spend time on. It's a good point, good question.
A very good question. And I've over the last year or so during the pandemic, that's all we've been hearing from our students is how much our classes and curriculum have helped them navigate uh, changes, whether it be change management or navigating, making a process more, efficient. And that's all we've been hearing from our students is that the relevant curriculum has really helped them through this past year, and they were very grateful to have that knowledge and have instructors that at their fingertips to ask questions. And then I'm sure as instructors, you all have seen a lot of folks have brought either their personal situations or work situations into a class project as well. So, great question, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Let me
If
add
there's
something,
no other questions,
Karin.
sure,
Let me
go
add
ahead.
one more little thing. As long as we got a couple of minutes left here, um, I'm not going to hold people long. But another thing that I really like about the Arkansas program here is I have built my career around changing the way organizations do business. My field of operations research is basically, we call it the science of better. You give me an operation, I'll make it better. We've got a series of math tools that we use, and we can really do some really outstanding changes. We can cut. One that we just did was a scheduling project for for our range operations. We have about an 800 square mile test range down here in Northwest Florida, and 125,000 square miles of Gulf ranges that our friend Tropical Storm Fred just ran through. But anyway, on those ranges, we schedule over 30,000 events every year, 700 a week, over 100 every day. People are out there doing some sort of military activity, and we've got to schedule them in such a way that we can deconflict them. Well, we used just sticky notes and markers, and it would take us 5 people 3 days to schedule each week's worth of work. We have used what's called a mixed integer linear program to improve that scheduling, and now we do the week scheduling with pause 20 minutes. Replace 5 people 3 days with 20 minutes worth of work. So these kinds of fundamental changes are difficult. And one of the things I love about the Arkansas program here in operations management is the fact that we have classes in organizational change and leading organizational change. And so if you think about what I just talked about, the critical path method, think about some of the changes that would be required in the workforce. So the some changes, for example, we have to change how we work. So when Karin asks me how long it's going to take to do that abstract, I can't tell her anymore that it's going to take me a week. I have to give her an honest answer and say, well, maybe an afternoon. I need a little bit of pad, but I need to cut my time estimates down. And the second thing we have to do is we have to change the way we manage. And so if I say, Karin, it'll take me about an afternoon, I can have it to you on this date, and I don't, and I'm late, if she jumps on my chili there and gets Dr. Ham to send me a warning notice that I was late with my abstract, guess what's going to happen next time she asks me how long it's going to take? I'm going to go back to my week, right? So leading the organizational change that's required to implement methodologies like this is no small task, and it's one of those things that really needs to be taken into account when you think about, hey, that sounds like a great idea. I wondered if it'd work where I work. Don't undersell the absolute criticality of having leaders to lead these changes.
So our next webinar is going to be presented by Dave Peterson. It's going to be in September, and we'll be sending some invitations out to join us there. It's going to be on why sustainment is critical to technical product circular supply chains. We want to thank everyone for attending. For more information about our flexible degree programs, you can either email myself or visit our website at operations-management.uark.edu. And just as a reminder that all registered participants will receive an email with this video link and some additional resources. So we hope to see you all online next month. Thank you again, Mr. Hutto. Thanks for all our attendees and our MSOM staff. And I hope everyone has a great day.